meeting is being recorded.
Good morning, everybody. Today is Sunday, March 6, 2022, and you are watching or listening to another edition of Forward Maryland. I'm Bill Woodcock.
And I'm Steve Hunt. Hope everybody's having a great weekend so far.
And we are pleased today to present a conversation with a friend of the podcast, a past guest, and now updating us on his campaign for House of Delegates and District 24 in Prince George's County. It's Richard Deshay Elliott. Richard, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me back on, Bill. Thanks for talking with you, Steve. I listen to y'all's podcast, and I am one of the illustrious 12 or 13 YouTube subscribers that has listened to your updates on the governor's race because I'm really interested in your opinions.
It's up to 37, Richard. So we're growing by the day.
Progress must be consistent. Keep it going.
So I am of course I am loving the UMBC sweatshirt and the Jeff Gordon hat, whose number was of course 24. So for District 24, you came on the show with Jason and I about a year ago, and you mentioned your intent to run for House of Delegates. You've since jumped both feet into the pool. How are you finding the experience so far? What has been the reaction that people have given you?
So far for House of Delegates, and I'm riding in the car with my Central Committeeman, Carl Parker Jr., who I believe will also be elected in the 24th Legislative District. Since entering the race, I have distributed something along the lines of 20,000 something pieces of literature. I gotten endorsements from all over the state, including multiple state senators, including my mentors, Senator Joe P. Carter and Senator Charles Sidner, both of the Baltimore City delegation, members of the Prince George's County Board of Education on the reform block, Anne Arundel County Council Chair Sarah Lacey. So I've been able to secure endorsements locally and at the state level. And there are now 2 open seats. Jazz Lewis, who is currently a delegate in this district, is running for Congress in the 4th Congressional District. So he will not be returning to Annapolis at present. And there's been a delegate who has been able to replace via appointment Delegate Eric Barron. So with 2 open seats, with a fairly clear lane as a progressive candidate, as a young candidate, as a reform candidate, with the alignment I have made with other candidates who are with me, I think I'm in a and I predict that I am in the top 3 on June 28th. I'd love to hear what you all have seen or heard, or what your opinions are, not just on my race, but what's going on in Central Prince George's as a whole.
Well, yeah, we were actually just talking about that with the news this morning of the county executive's endorsement of Wes Moore for governor. We were both surprised that I won't pretend to speak for Steve, but I believe I'm doing that in this case. We were both surprised that she decided to maybe go the route of kingmaker and maybe try to elevate Wes Moore's profile, as opposed to going with one of the more front-running candidates like Comptroller Francho or former Attorney General Gansler, and also wondering what that endorsement's going to come with. Is it going to be a name-only endorsement, or is it going to come with resources with which to win Prince George's County? Because as you would well know, Richard, if a candidate who can win and can do well in Prince George's County statewide, that goes a long way to winning a statewide primary.
Absolutely. So I think those are really good questions. First, is this going to be an endorsement in, you could say, press ink only? In Prince George's, we are dominated by what are referred to as sample ballots. Angela Alsobrooks, and traditionally the county executive candidate, does not do their own personal sample ballot. They instead ride the sample ballot of various senators and others in the county. Angela Alsobrooks, in fact, her only sample ballot she did was in 2020 for a school board candidate who was roundly defeated in the school board district next to mine, where she supported Brian Swan over Shayla Adams Stafford. Shayla Adams Stafford got about 2/3 of the vote in the general election. So that's to say that the support of Angela Alsobrooks is not to say an automatic game winner, And in fact, I dare to say that because of how our elections are split in Prince George's County traditionally along reform and anti-reform elements, that now I would predict that Comptroller Francho, Westmore, and Rashawn Baker will all be in the roughly 20 to 26% range in Prince George's, and all of the remaining candidates will be in the 10% or less range, as our county more or less breaks down into communities of viability rather than on issue constituencies, as may be the case in a Baltimore City or in an Anne Arundel. I think that this is a very clear move. Granted, I'm going to say that this is a disclaimer as a Francho Anderson Walker supporter, that this is a move that is done with the specific intent or purpose of further harming or, taking down a peg the Baker campaign and elevating the Westmore campaign. But with how many Prince Georgians do not hold a positive opinion of Miss Alsobrooks, it remains to be seen how many additional votes this adds to her column, and mostly how it affects the fundraising and endorsement game statewide. So I don't think that there are many Prince Georgians that woke up this morning thinking I'm now with Wes, but there might be a lot more donors that think, okay, Baker's done for, what's my best option now?
Yeah, I think you're spot on, Richard, and I would say that that the intent is definitely to cut off Rush Baker at the knees, but I'm not sure, in the words of Monty
I'm not sure this does that.
I'm not sure he's dead yet. I know our delegation was very supportive of County Executive Baker during the 2018 campaign, did a lot of work, put up signed locations, contributed money, so he's not done. So I know we only have about 10 minutes this morning, so I know you and I could probably sit here and talk politics for hours. And in fact, so could Steve, but I know he doesn't know you yet. So I want to give Steve a chance to ask some questions so you guys can talk about your campaign.
Well, Rich, first of all, thanks for joining us. I appreciate it. I know, obviously, being on the campaign trail, your time is very valuable. I know you're doing a lot, and I see a lot of your stuff online. I've been a follower of yours, actually. Some of the things you put on certain pages, Facebook, etc. And just so you know, when Bill suggested that we do this interview, I was very intrigued and excited. One, because I knew a good bit about you and what you've done and your voice in the conversation. But also, just I was raised in South Prince George's County. I'm a Fort Washington guy.
Hey, you're Monique Land.
Yeah, so I am a Howard County transplant. Up until 2000, I was a Prince Georgian, and it's still where my heart is. So obviously, you talk Prince Georgeans, you're getting my attention. So good to talk to the hometown there. So anyway, my first question really, getting into legislation, and the big one that's out there now that really landed in Annapolis and outside of Annapolis throughout the state is the legislation about cannabis. Delegate Clippinger, I believe, is now pushed forward a piece of legislation looking to get it on the ballot, constitutional amendment to make cannabis legal for people over the age of 21. You have spoken about that extensively, not just as its own issue, but in terms of your platform as it relates to criminal justice. So I want to get your take on the actual piece of legislation, your opinion of it, how it will make a difference, things you would have wanted to do differently or see differently in that legislation.
Okay, so thank you for that question. I am in support of cannabis being legalized. I prefer if it were just simply done through it's a lot of water spilled. If it was simply done through the legislature rather than done via referendum, as it would be quicker implemented. And I'd rather get people out of jail and out of prison immediately because COVID is still ravaging Maryland prisons in particular. That said, I am a strong supporter of Senator Jill P. Carter and Delegate Acevero's legislation, particularly because of the reparations aspects. They want to make sure that of the tax revenue generated, that it goes to the zip codes that were the most targeted by the war on drugs. Last year, when Prince George's County Democrats were talking about this legislation, that was one of our components we proposed, following the zip codes, because they are quite literally the areas of most impact. So while legalizing is important, it is also just as important to make sure that we repair damages, because there is still lots of suffering related to people being incarcerated, whether that be for small amounts of possession or whether that be for small level sales. All of this still needs to be addressed. And while the legalization referendum aspect does address some of it, it is not as wholesale of addressal as Senator Jill P. Carter's legislation on that matter.
Oh, thank you for that. So I'm assuming that if you were to be sitting in Annapolis next year as a member of the House of Delegates, you would push further measures if this was the only thing that went through, and it went to the ballot and passed, of course.
Yes, that's a really good question. Yes. So let's say that the current, I'll call it weak reform referendum is able to pass, which is, of course, progress. I would still propose legislation that would basically be budgetary language, that any funds related to that program go to the community's impact, and also for the social equity licenses, so that it becomes, so that cannabis sales are their own cottage industry. Cannabis growing can be its own cottage industry, because as long as it remains, I'll say, an enterprise that requires licensure and such, there will always be people who are unable to qualify, many of whom are able to grow quality product, just to be frank. So if we want that to be both a good market and to involve social uplift, if the current legislation goes through, I would absolutely support further budgetary changes in the future.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Getting into legislation, other legislation that impacts your district, I did a quick search of the House of Delegates website. As you know, a lot of pieces of legislation. I believe we are either at or closing in on crossover. So, some of the legislation that's out there may or may not make it through. But when I was looking at stuff that came out of District 24 with your incumbents, Delegate Harrison has 5 pieces of legislation out there, from looks like Juneteenth, tobacco licensing, a caregiver tax credit. There's one about sports stadium wagering that I'll get to in a minute. And then there's another 7 by, as you mentioned, outgoing Delegate Jazz Lewis running for Congress. He has things such as body-worn cameras, diversity amongst asset managers, collective bargaining, et cetera. Any of those pieces of legislation, are there any that you've supported, not supported, maybe your opinions, and are there missing pieces as far as legislation that could have come out of the District 24 delegation?
Sure. So I would say the main piece of, or the main policy proposal that's been put on the table that I have concern with is regarding, and you might have seen this on Facebook in the past couple of days, is regarding a proposal for giving public funds to the Washington Commanders for a new football stadium, because this would further. Yes.
You already hit my third question, bro. That was gonna be my third question. I saw but you know what? Let her fly, man.
Okay, so
we only have 5 minutes, so we should.
I'll address both really quick. So the main proposal that I've seen come out of the 24th delegation that I had concern with was the proposal to give public money and public land to the Washington Commanders. They're a $1 billion team. They're valued at, I think, $4.2 billion. This plan has not even said what they want to do with the existing FedEx field. I don't support giving stadium subsidies to $1 billion teams and billionaire owners. I would much prefer that the team be able to go either A, fully pay for a new stadium using their own funds, or relocate to Virginia, Washington, D.C., and then to turn the existing FedEx field into basically an office park with housing, offices, perhaps a school. It's an incredibly large space, and the destruction cost alone could be much better spent on other things. For regarding legislation from Delegate Harrison, I support the Juneteenth bill, but I put forward amendments that Senator Carter agreed with, specifically regarding funding of our school systems. If we're going to have a Juneteenth bill, it should have material benefits for Black majority counties in the public schools of Charles, Prince George's, and Baltimore. Delegate Harrison did not choose to do that. She instead went with just proposing the bill again. And then another area that I do not see being addressed, that people have talked about numerous times, is regarding the local nicotine shops that sell, glassware, tobacco, nicotine, etc., regarding limiting their zoning abilities. Because in the 24th, if you go along MLK Highway, you have one of those every, in certain areas, you have more than one of them in every square mile. There has not been any legislation to address this from a zoning perspective. Delegate Harrison was a former member of the county council. She is fully aware of the zoning abilities of the council because we don't have municipalities in the entire county. There has not been anything to address that. So that's one thing I would absolutely do, is put in legislation to limit the maximum zoning capacity for tobacco and liquor shops, particularly in areas that already have high incidence of low health indicators like diabetes, high blood sugar, etc.
Well, Rich, I appreciate the very lengthy and very detailed answers on that. You know, Bill talked about how you guys could go all day on politics. I could go all day on policy, and specifically Prince George's County. I still call it my county, even though I've been in Howard for a long time. But we're definitely
It's yours.
we're definitely going to have you back to get into more detail, because, you know, looking at your website and talking to you, there's a lot there, which I think is great for the citizens of District 24. But with that, Bill, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Rich, in the last couple minutes, let people know how people can how they can get in touch with your campaign and get involved.
My website is richformaryland.com, richformaryland.com. You go on there, there's all of my endorsements, the candidates I'm supporting, the people who've endorsed me, and most importantly, all of my legislation written out in complete bills, how it's going to be funded, who's going to review it, et cetera, et cetera. So there's enough information there to go over for days at end. And then you can go to my social medias. That is, again, at Rich for Maryland on Instagram and Twitter, and Richard Deshay Elliott or on Facebook. I'd encourage people, regardless of what part of Maryland you're from, I'm running in a state race. The implications of my race are to do things, whether it be impacting zoning on liquor stores in Washington County, or whether it be about impacting the minimum wage in the entire state. So I encourage people to reach out to me, and I dare to say I am the most accessible politician in Maryland. It's really hard to beat me for that, really hard.
That I will say that is unequivocally true, yeah. Richard, and I will say also that this gentleman is a political dynamo. I know you've been working many long hours and many long days on this campaign, and I know firsthand from our communications, you keep a long day, and you know, I'm really happy to see the work paying off for you. So all the best, Richard, and we hope you can come back, and hopefully next time as the putative delegate-elect come after June.
Can have another discussion period, let's say like in early June, so that we can go over not just my race, but what our predictions are for the election. And before we end, I'd like to list out a few of the other people who I'm supporting. So again,
absolutely,
Richard Deshay Elliott, candidate for House of Delegates in the 24th Legislative District. I'm going to flip around to my endorsement sheet. So you have the classic endorsement sheet that people have seen. Peter Francham, Monique Anderson
looks
Walker.
like a super card poster from the 90s, Steve.
Me, you got Tim Adams, future Attorney General Brown, future Congressman Ivey, Sylvia Johnson for State Senate in the Bowie area, Jolene Ivey, Belinda Queen, Crystal Oriata, and then Ed Burrows, who's already on the county council, and Sean Michael Wilson, who's running for school board in the district. So that's the whole endorsement sheet. And then here's me, people I'm supporting, track record on the issues, qualified, invested in the endorsements. You will see this online again, and we're signing off with Forward Maryland. Thank you so much.
Those are some outstanding endorsements there, Richard. Thank you. And we will take you up. We will chat again in about 3 months.
And I cannot wait to read the next thing about the governor's race.
I will be coming next weekend. So Richard, thank you. Steve, thank you.
Richard.
Listeners and viewers, thank you. Have a great rest of your weekend, and we'll see you next weekend on Forward Maryland. Take care, everybody.